Okay, thanks everybody. I first want to start out by thanking Isabel, Danielle, and Jennifer Mays and all of the people who put together this meeting. This has been really fun. What I'm going to talk about today is a project that we've done for the past 4 years that was an outgrowth of Bob Hazen's relatively recent ideas about mineral ecology, which is all about the diversity and relationships and distributions of minerals on Earth. So I was, at that time, I was a postdoc with Bob, and he brought up this idea, what if we could not just kind of plod along and discover minerals by happenstance, but what if we used these big data sets to analyze the diversity of minerals and try to make specific predictions about what minerals should exist and which ones we haven't discovered yet? And can we actually encourage the community to go out and find these minerals? So that's what we tried to do. That was the thrust of the Carbon Mineral Challenge. And so we contacted people and assembled this team and sent people out there to try to find these undiscovered things. So first, I want to acknowledge collaborators on the project. The whole thing, of course, was Bob Hazen's idea, but many other people assisted in putting together this data, in assembling it into a database, analyzing the data, and helping us make these predictions. So I want to acknowledge all of those collaborators. I also want to acknowledge the Deep Carbon Observatory engagement team, who did a huge amount of the work, the legwork in putting together this project. The lovely mineral cards that you all got in your packets at the beginning of the meeting were the work of Darlene Truechrist. The poster that I displayed yesterday and many of the other promotional materials for the Carbon Mineral Challenge were designed by Josh Wood, and all of these other folks did lots of legwork for the challenge, so I want to thank all of them. So I'll first talk about just kind of the basic ideas of mineral ecology that led to the challenge. I'll talk specifically about the ecology of carbon minerals, how many we think there are and what sorts there are. I'll talk about how we executed the Carbon Mineral Challenge, and then of course I'll spend some time talking about the results of the challenge and reflecting on what we found and where I think this is headed for the future. Okay, so first just the basic concepts of mineral ecology. So mineral ecology is all about the distribution of minerals on Earth and on other planetary bodies. And it turns out that if you look at the frequencies with which different minerals occur on Earth, they occur in exactly the same statistical distribution as words in a book. So think about just opening up a book and looking at the words that are within it and tallying up all the words that you see. And what you'll find is that only a few words are very common. Things like a, and, the, is, all of those words we see all the time. They're ubiquitous. But most words, most species of words, so to speak, are actually rare. We don't find them much at all. And the diversity and combination of those rare words define the style of writing, can actually define the authorship. And linguists do this. They use these statistical methods to figure out the author of an unsigned manuscript. Not only can you do that, but you can also predict what the author's total vocabulary is. How many words does this author know? So it turns out you can do the same thing with minerals. They conform to this same distribution. And here's a plot of it. Whoops. So on the y-axis here is the number of mineral species, and on the x-axis is the number of localities that we know them from. So in other words, this graph is telling us that over 1,000 mineral species only occur at one locality on Earth. About 600 of them only occur at 2 localities on Earth, and so on and so forth. And you can see it fits very well to this statistical distribution that we call an LNRE distribution. That stands for a large number of rare events. So most species are rare, and then there's only a few species that are actually very common. This shows an accumulation curve. So on the y-axis here, we're plotting the number of unique known mineral species that we know about, and on the x-axis, we're showing the number of mineral observations that we've made. So in other words, I come over here and I say, well, at this location, I see this mineral. Well, that's one tick on my x-axis. And I come over here and I say, oh, well, at this location, I have this other mineral. That's another tick on my x-axis. And in the beginning of that process, we find new species very quickly because most things we haven't seen before. But very quickly, it starts to taper off because things that we find are increasingly species that we already know about. Okay? And this is something that biologists have been doing for a while, but us mineralogists have only started recently. So as of February 2014, which is the data download that we used to make the predictions for this project, we were about right here. We had about 4,800 mineral species total. Now, if we continue, if we just mathematically extrapolate that curve into the future, then it asymptotes and we get to the total number of mineral species that there should be on Earth. And when we first did this, we got about 6,400 mineral species predicted. It turns out our collaborators, Greta Heisted at Purdue University, is a mathematician, and she reanalyzed this data using Bayesian methods and actually came up with an estimate of 9,300 total minerals. So that means, subtract out the ones that we already know, that means there's about 4,800 undiscovered minerals on Earth today. They're out there somewhere, but we just don't know where they are. Okay, so carbon minerals in particular, this graph shows a network diagram. It's a special kind of network diagram called a bipartite network diagram, and Shauna Morrison showed you a little bit of this yesterday. This is for all the carbon minerals that we knew about at the beginning of the challenge. And in this diagram, we have two types of nodes. These black dots right there indicate localities, and the colored dots there indicate the different mineral species. And it shows you where all the different mineral species occur. They're all tied to the localities at which they occur. And you can see there's a really interesting pattern here. These minerals that are really abundant, that are colored according to the number of localities at which they occur, the ones down here are the really super common carbon minerals. So there's calcite right there. You work your way up a little bit, and there's malachite, another very common carbonate mineral. There's witherite, a somewhat less common carbonate mineral. That's barium carbonate. And then here's this weird mineral that nobody's ever heard. I've never even heard of this one, Cozoite lanthanum. Exists up here, and it's tied, you can see that it's tied to localities that have a large amount of mineral diversity, that have many rare minerals fanning out of them. Whereas the inverse is true down here. I've got very common minerals that are tied to localities that don't have a lot of mineral diversity, have very few minerals on them that contain them. So that shows us a pattern. This is actually a graphic representation of that LNRE distribution that I was showing earlier. So it shows us how carbon minerals are distributed, and it enables us to start making predictions about where we can find new ones. Here's that accumulation curve of the known number of species that we have. We started out with 406 different species at the beginning of the challenge. This was from about 83,000 or so mineral location pairs that had been measured by that point in time. And when you extrapolate it out here, we estimated that there should be a total of about 551. We now think that's probably somewhat of an underestimate given the new methods that we're developing now. But if you take that 551 total that we estimate minus the 406 that we already knew about, that would predict about 145 carbon minerals somewhere on the Earth that we just haven't discovered yet. So how do we go about predicting these? What carbon minerals should exist? You know, how do we go about making a prediction like that? Well, we used a couple of different techniques. We can take minerals that we already know about and just perform reasonable replacements. For example, we already knew about this mineral parasite cerium. It's got the rare earth metal cerium in there. Well, rare earths substitute for each other all the time. So it's reasonable to expect that we could just switch out cerium for another rare earth element like lanthanum. And so, hey, maybe parasite lanthanum exists. So we made that prediction. We can also predict based on compounds that we already know about that we just haven't found in nature yet. So we can take stable synthetic compounds that we know about, like calcium carbide, and predict, well, maybe that occurs in nature too, in the right environment, higher temperature environment, reducing environment, and we can make the prediction, well, maybe carbidite exists. That's not a real name, I just made that up, but that's a potentially new mineral that's out there to be discovered. So Bob Hazen and myself and several other people put together this paper that enumerated all of these predictions. So here's a table with all of our synthetic analog predictions, a bunch of carbide minerals there. Here's a table of a bunch of predictions based on substitutions. And where do we look for these? Well, the bipartite carbon mineral network that I showed before gives us some clues. What locations do we want to look in? Well, we want to look in locations up here that have the highest mineral diversity. That's where we're going to find those rare species, which are the ones that are missing in our network diagram up here. So indeed, we wound up finding many of these, and they did attach to locations in the network diagram up here. So for example, this mineral tenunculite, which is just uric acid, was found at the Kola Peninsula in Russia. That's the locality up there. Parasite lanthanum, turns out it does exist. That was found at a location in Brazil. And then this weird sodium lead carbonate mineral, abelleite, was found in Spain. They all seemed to be up at these localities with a great deal of diversity. So how did the Carbon Mineral Challenge work? Well, we just spread the word to as many museum curators and lab directors and amateur mineral hunting clubs as we could, and we encouraged them to go out and find these things. This guy up here is Jeff Post at the Smithsonian, who actually helped me look through some samples and try to find some new species. So we advertised in all of these venues, journals and scientific societies, collectors clubs, and we tried to spread the word and encourage people to look for these in their unusual samples. We put together an international advisory board of mineralogists all over the world to help people analyze samples and to help spread the word in their region. That's all the people that we gathered for that. We had a really great team, and I really enjoyed working with all of them. Here's some photos of us doing some networking at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. I'm really happy up there in that photo because I've got a little sample of a sample that was given to me by Tony Kampf, who's one of the most prolific describers of new minerals. And I helped him characterize this mineral. It turned out to be a new mineral species, but it didn't have carbon. So unfortunately, I couldn't include it in the challenge, but that was a fun thing. So some results of the challenge. We found 31 new carbon-bearing mineral species in the 4 years that we did this project. So I'm pretty proud of that. It's quite a few out of the 145 that we predicted. Two of the ones that were discovered were specifically predicted in our paper, but many more of them were kind of close but no cigar. They were very much resembled species that we predicted, but they were a little bit different. So it really speaks to the diversity of how many carbon-bearing phases are actually out there. Just to show you a few examples of minerals that were found, abelleite, that's that weird carbonate mineral that was found in Spain. Parasite lanthanum, that was one that we predicted to exist, and indeed that was found at an igneous deposit in Brazil. This is a really fun one, tenunculite, that uric acid. It crystallizes, and you say, Dan, why do you have a picture of a falcon up there? Well, to be polite about it, the mineral actually forms through falcon excrement. It hits heated rocks, and the volatiles boil away, and you get this tenunculite. A collector in New Hampshire actually went out into the woods and said, I think I found something new. I found these little white crystals, and contacted us, and we directed them to one of our partner laboratories, Raquel Alenzo Perez at Harvard University. They measured it. They wound up finding that it was not a new mineral, but it was tenunculite. It was the second known occurrence of tenunculite in the world. So we missed out on a new species, but we found the second natural occurrence of this weird stuff that forms in this very weird way. We also got the most structurally complex mineral on Earth. This is ewingite, a magnesium calcium uranyl carbonate. It's made of these clusters of uranyl and carbonate, and it actually has the most complex structure that we know of in the mineral kingdom today. It has over 12,000 bits of information in the unit cell, and a unit cell volume of over 60,000 cubic angstroms. For those of you who don't do mineralogy, that's ridiculously large. That's a particle about 8 nanometers in diameter, just for one unit cell of the material. We found new carbide minerals. This is edscottite that was found in a meteorite from Australia. So we even found things in extraterrestrial samples. A group from South Africa contacted us. They're also actively working now on a meteorite from the Sahara that they believe contains new carbide phases as well. There have been a lot of new collaborations to come out of this. I'm working with Shauna Morrison, my former grad student Kelly Wilson, and Michael Annenberg from Australia National University to characterize some new carbonates from a deposit in Australia. So that's ongoing work. We think that perhaps we have some new phases there. I also want to address, just briefly here, you might be asking, well, did this make a difference? Did we accelerate the discovery of carbon-bearing minerals? Well, here's the discovery of minerals as a function of time. And if you convert this into the fraction of carbon minerals that we found, the fraction of new discoveries that actually contain carbon, here they are as a function of year. And here's the years that we were doing the challenge, and here's the years before. And the average before was about 3.6% new species contain carbon. And afterward, it was about 5% that contain carbon. So there's some overlap here. But I did a statistical test. It turns out when you do the statistical test, it did show a statistically significant increase. Now, I'm a little skeptical of this result, I have to say, because this was only a few per year that were being discovered. So we're dealing with the statistics of small sample sizes here, so I don't want to get too carried away. I think we have to do a project like this for a longer period of time, but it seems like at least it's plausible that we had an impact on the community. I describe all these minerals in this paper that I just published in the Australian Journal of Mineralogy. It has lots of pretty pictures, so you can check that out if you're interested in looking at all of the new minerals. So to conclude, I'm a little bit over time here, so I'll throw all of these up. We know that we can make statistical predictions about unknown minerals. We know that we can encourage the community to go out there and find them. And I think that collaborations like this between the academic but also the industrial sector, museums, and the collector community, I think have a lot of potential to illuminate new things in the future. And I think that's a direction that we want to go. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan. I think that's the first time I've ever seen a talk with Charles Dickens and falcon excrement in the same presentation. So I congratulate you on that. Have we got any questions at all? So I had a very quick one. You said some sites have more mineral diversity than others. Do you have any insights into why some sites have more mineral diversity than others?
Yeah, it seems to be just kind of a stochastic process, where in certain locations, you get a lot of chemical diversity. And I think the diversity of chemical compositions and pressures and temperatures leads to that. When you get these weird locations with weird combinations of elements, you get weird combinations of minerals.
So I won't be stumbling over a new carbon mineral just on the front lawn here. That's a shame. We have a question. Just
Probably not,
I do have a very
know.
quick question about the falcon excrement. So it's quite unique that you're finding a new mineral assemblage that is generated from the uric acid of falcons, but the uric acid is not unique to falcons. So could it be that other bird species are also generating the same mineral, or is it very specific to this particular falcon?
I think it's very likely that other birds and maybe even other animals are producing the same mineral. Yeah, I think we've only confirmed that it's the European kestrel falcon in the case of the Kola Peninsula that is at work here. But yes, I'm sure that there's other things like this out there that we just haven't characterized well enough yet.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a great place to end.